The metrics are not the point. And I know that. I think it's so interesting because I think I've made episodes about this in the past, and yet I find myself falling into that same unconscious trap. And I do consider it a trap because it makes me feel worse when I focus on the metrics, rather than focusing on the things I can control. Welcome back to Purple Elephant Radio. Since this is the first episode I'll be recording since the release of Off With His Head, my newest book on Amazon right now, I wanted to start this episode off with a poem called Self-Mastery, which I think will foreshadow the episode as a whole quite well. It's in 5 parts. Part 1. In the quiet part of the roaring city, the clouds hang low, so low I can almost grab one. In the quiet place of the roaring mind, self-mastery wafts just above the rafters of my glass-ceilinged soul. Reach out, grasp it. As distant as the moon, I oft forget I cannot pinch it and pull it down to me. Rise up to it. Subtle touches of aesthetic style make me lighter than air. I drift up. Though there lingers on the fear of floating forever, cast away to oblivion, a virtuous star, deplored for his self-effacing discipline. Indulging in vice, I touch ground again. In a way, I prefer the view from far away. The haze takes shape as the Vitruvian man. Though, in a breath, in the heart, in the quiet part of night, doubt fills my chest like an offbeat palpitation. Is this where the white flag waving starts? Is this where the white flag waving starts? Part 2. In the eyes of every unenlightened woman and man, there lives a mind with no master. We call it the elephant of impulse. We call ourselves the rider. Thus, the thinker called me is always deceived by the bodily plea for more of and more of and more of, and when will we flee? The clutches of vice seem unrelenting. We must think back and ask at the time when we were free, what drew I to the vice that now ensnares me? One self partitioned into 2 divides more than past and present time, divides more than mastered and mastering self, divides more than impulsive elephant and steering rider. Our division of the ideal and the actual is the root of all cause. This lust for self-mastery is the root of all flaws. Part 3. But if I don't aim above the actual, if I give up all cause, won't I solidify my destiny? Won't my life slowly pause? Oh, I see you have not reached where the sidewalk ends. For without a target out there, without a desire worth prayer, it is only the ignorant who fall for despair. For even there, an ideal still keeps the knotted mind defective. To seek to end seeking reflects the ego's bright glare. Only as witness to this mind-spinning affair will the split self dissolve. The mind will repair. Part 4. I find serenity there. Beyond the future, behind the past, it's all right here, now. No self can last. And yet one finds one still will act, moving forward without the future's hook clipped upon one's cheek. And so it was written, what is passed on to the meek. This is true nature, to move unabated without the bait. This is true nature, to live outside the snare of fate. Part 5. Aim without effort, there is no need to try. Let the arrow go, without a where or a why. Find a target struck, call it the self-mastered bullseye. So that is just one out of 50 plus poems included in the Off With His Head book. Also, the majority of the book is 7 major essays that really revolve around the topic of ego and egoic identity, but in many different domains, from everything from personality developing in high school and adulthood, to the political landscape, to activism, and also offers some philosophies to give you maybe some assurance, some faith when it comes to creating stuff. Now, and I always say faith without the religious overtones is what I like to emphasize. So it is a hefty book, and I highly recommend, if it catches your interest, check the description. It'll be on Amazon for right now. The paperback is $21.50. And I mean, that's less than 5 days worth of coffee. And I think it's a book that will really stay with you for a long time. So enough of the sales pitch. I said the poem was going to be foreshadowing this episode. The poem called Self-Mastery. And really the topic of this video, and I'll tie in self-mastery to it, but the topic is endings and beginnings. And specifically in that order. Because just to give a little context in terms of when I'm recording this is at a time when a lot of things have come to an end or are about to come to an end. I mean, as of recording, I just finished my job. I put in my 2 weeks notice, got cut a little bit short because of an injury, but the job is over. And so I have a time vacuum now. Also coming up at the end of this month, my lease is going to be ending, and I'm going to move back home just for a little bit of time. So that is another thing that's really just the sense of comfort, of routine that I've taken for granted is going to be changing very soon. And then, of course, the biggest thing is the book. Off with his head, it's done. It's out. It's out of my hands. And yet, why do I feel like I've given birth, but I just can't cut the umbilical cord? And I think there are a couple reasons for that. And that's really what the focus of the episode is on. So if you need something more general to understand how it relates to you, when a big project comes to an end or is about to come to an end, and you feel this impending time vacuum, existential vacuum, the shadow coming upon you, how do you reignite the spark for the next thing? Because I will say this, really what happened whenever the book was published, February 16th. So before that point, I'd been going, writing the book or doing something related to formatting or editing, but doing something related to the book. When the book was published, it wasn't like I was like, finally, I can just chill. It became, now I got to market this. Now I got to finish editing the content, get the podcast out there, cut it into clips, do the short poem films, which I recommend watching those if you haven't seen them yet. But basically just making more content, all pointing, directing people to the book. And if I'm honest, this feels like the first thing I've done that, yes, I've talked about it, but even though I'm using the book as the core example of this topic, it doesn't feel related. So basically what I'm saying is I've sort of felt unable to let go of the book. And I think the reason is that I just said is because if I do, I've slowly been testing this out, I feel like I'm letting myself go into this existential vacuum. Like I don't have another big, audacious goal to keep directing me towards something. And I think it's important to note that, especially if you have experienced something like that, or maybe you know something is coming up in the future where you're about to finish something big, because I've noticed this in myself. I right now have this tendency to, two major things. One is I'm quickly trying to find a new goal, a new massive goal, regardless of whether it's what I actually want to be doing. So I'm basically trying to fill the void with a similar type of project. I'll just start working on my next book. The reason that doesn't necessarily work for me is because, like I said, a lot of other things are changing. I just left my job and I'm going to be starting on a new career path, which that is something that I really need to focus on and prioritize more than just lumping in a new creative project. So I need to shift gears, which makes this a little bit more tricky, this vacuum, dealing with it. But the other thing I've noticed is, as a coping mechanism, I would say like an unconscious coping mechanism, is that I've begun to turn more and more towards short-term gratification and short-term metrics. Basically, my goal before the book getting published was publish the book. Everything to do that was within my control. And including the marketing materials. It was just create the stuff, have it ready. But then once I started releasing stuff, once the book was published, it was no longer about stuff in my control, but stuff outside of my control. And I became hyper-focused on the day-to-day sales of the book, which, I mean, I'll be honest, it's not like I'm getting hundreds of sales a day. I'm talking 1 or 2 or 3 sales a day. So looking at something that really isn't that interesting. And then because that number was too low for me, I suddenly turned to social media metrics. Okay, how many likes are these posts getting? How many views are these reels getting? And all the while, and this has been the past couple weeks, I've just felt more hollow and more empty and more aware that those things are not the point of life. I know it's a generalization, but more specifically, they're not the point of releasing a project, like whether it's a book, whether it's a film, whether it's an album of music. The metrics are not the point. And I know that. I think it's so interesting because I think I've made episodes about this in the past, and yet I find myself falling into that same unconscious trap. And I do consider it a trap because it makes me feel worse when I focus on the metrics, rather than focusing on the things I can control. There's almost this gravitational pull in the psyche to focus on the things we can't control, not, and this is my hypothesis, not because we can't control them, but because it feels good, it feels reassuring to know someone outside of ourselves is interested in what we produce, whether it's very short form content or something a little bit longer like a book. We want to see people enjoying the work. But is there a balance there? Because like I said, I mean, first of all, I'll put it this way. No matter what, I mean, if I got 100 sales the first day of the book, I would be dissatisfied. Just knowing myself, knowing where my thoughts have been at, no matter what the metric I'm looking at, whether it's 10 likes or 100 likes, 10 views or 1,000 views, the focus is on this is not enough. Or what if I got just a little bit more? I mean, that's why, for myself, why I notice I keep going back to these metrics that are maybe changing 1 or 2 things a day. Yeah, maybe I got a follower, maybe I lost a follower. It's not interesting. To me, it reveals a lack of direction. Like, I don't know where I'm going next. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, or I'm not saying that it's a good thing. But I do have to realize when I don't have a long-term direction, or this kind of big, audacious goal that I can always look up at and know that's my North Star, because I don't have that right now. I have to be on high alert for falling into that unconscious trap of focusing on metrics, of focusing on things I can't control, of focusing on the external world. So this is not a super long form episode, but I just want to end with 3 tidbits of advice, 3 things that have been helping me shift away from this focus on things I can't control. Coming back to my own, if you want to put it that way, coming back to my own goals, my own values, and not focusing on what other people are doing or thinking. First thing for me is shifting my content landscape. So whether that means reading different things, reading different genres, not just different books. For me personally, for the Off of This Head book, I was reading a lot of philosophy, spiritual books, psychology books. I'm now shifting to reading fiction and books about writing fiction, because that is the next project I want to work on, even if it's a little bit longer term. So shifting both what I'm reading, but also online content. Again, I had a very specific, narrow content bubble that I was looking at when it came to kind of stuff that might help me or just inspire ideas for Off of This Head. And I'm doing my best to shift away from that. And on YouTube, it's a little bit trickier because obviously something I've talked about a lot is the algorithms and how focused they are on not just keeping your attention, but keeping you in the same train of thinking. Even if you're getting exposed to a couple different ideas, they're still all political, or they're still all about art, or they're still all about this. So getting out of that range of content has been tricky for me. I think what helps is, like, because I know very vaguely the next area I want to go, and that is more in the fictional route. One thing that I've been doing is thinking of names, big names, someone like Alfred Hitchcock, watching an interview of his, or stuff that he's made where he's talked about the craft. And over time, if you keep finding names, and eventually you'll start hearing, Hitchcock talks about someone that inspires him. Oh, look at this person. So you do that over time. It does take a little bit because YouTube really likes political content because it definitely keeps people engaged. But over time, that does shift towards the things that you want to be watching. And it takes effort. It takes a very strong focus on, I don't want to be watching this content anymore, even though it is interesting to me, even though it is provoking to me. So just changing the content in general, books, music, podcasts, YouTube videos, shifting it up. Now, number 2 is a little counterintuitive. One thing I've been doing is looking back at this book that I just finished, that I said I'm trying to move away from, and looking at it with the eyes of a sort of objective reader. And in doing so, it's given me a little bit of inspiration for the next thing I want to work on. Specifically, it's given me some directions that maybe I couldn't really explore fully in this book. Or maybe the idea that I just barely touched on would work better as a short film idea or a short story idea. So basically, using whatever that completed work is as a diving board to jump into the next thing. And that's very different from saying, I'm going to instantly jump on the sequel. It's very expansive. To use an improv term, we would call it a tangent pole. So seeing something that just catches my eye in the book and then writing about that topic, or, using whatever artistic form I want for that topic that is just barely related to this book. So thematic jumping, I might call that. Taking a thematic jump. And the third thing has been, this. Yes, I'm not exaggerating when I say that. I'm not trying to be meta when I say that. The fact that I've set this all up has been extremely helpful to get me out of this, what I would consider a rut. Not like I've been doing the same thing since the book's been published, but like I don't know what to do since the book's been published. And I didn't write a script for this. And all the ideas you just heard, I've just thought of in the moment that I've said them. And so now when this video is posted, I will have a lot more clarity in terms of what I want to do now than I did before recording. And so what that means for you is maybe you don't have to start your own podcast. You don't have to start your own vlog, but record yourself, record your thoughts. Because a lot of times when we keep our thoughts in our head, they're just the same thing repeated over and over. But when we put it down, we may say, oh, I've had that thought before. Or, oh, that doesn't look as scary when it's said out loud or written down. Because the mind, because it's hazy, because we can't necessarily figure out when we've had that thought last, it does sort of turn a molehill into a mountain. It makes the shadow of our, fearful thoughts seem a lot scarier than it is in the light of day. So I just want to thank you for listening to this jumble of an episode. Yes, I was trying to clarify some ideas. Yes, maybe it wasn't phrased in the most pretty way. Yes, maybe some of it didn't make 100% sense. But I want to thank you for listening anyway. And I will be making a lot more podcast episodes soon, because it really does help me clarify what I'm thinking about. And there will be another podcast coming up. A whole other show. But that will be revealed in due time. Thank you. If you like this episode, it would mean a hell of a lot if you rated it on Spotify, on iTunes, left a nice review. Thank you.